Hi everybody. If you've been watching my YouTube channel, you know it's all about painting for your soul. I've done several video tutorials now doing single pages in an 8x8-inch mixed media book. I show great detail in each of those pages creations, but sometimes I like to do quick and simple little things in a tiny book. And I found these on Amazon and they came in a set of 3 and they're adorable. They're on watercolor paper this time, so it's thicker, and we can have a lot more fun experimenting with water and paint and how it reacts on that page without it bubbling up like the other book would do. I'll show you in the description below where you can get these books. They're so much fun. So what I'm doing is I've added a lot of water onto the page in different spots, and I lightly dipped my long bristled brush into that high flow acrylic paint, and I'm just watching how it spreads. I'm just playing around like I've got not a thought in my head about what's going to happen here. In fact, I didn't even know at this time if it would become any kind of a page to be happy with, but I am really right now just playing with the movement of the paint in the water. I'm using high flow acrylics, but you could do the same thing with inks, with bottles of inks, which you can get in so many varieties and colors, and the same thing with watercolor. So let's have a lot of fun here. Because it's such a tiny little book, I don't feel any pressure on what I'm creating. It's just a tiny little book. I might use it later on for reference to what colors worked really well, what techniques worked. It could be a little keeper for you just to have on hand for as you learn and grow and become a better artist. Anyway, I'm not trying to teach you to be an artist. I'm trying to teach you to let loose and have fun. And that's what this is all about. And hopefully you could do one of these a day, or, they're not long. They're just quickie little things. I've got all 7 of them for the week in one video here. It is a little long, but you could fast forward if you like. So look at the fun we're having here. Right there I'm exploring with what happens when I put a little blue and green together in the same pool of water. I've used a clip there because this is the first page. It's hard to hold them down, so I needed 2 fingers to hold down. So I've got one with a clip and one with my finger. Again, I'm just experimenting here. I'm not trying to even create anything. I'm experimenting even with how much paint I put on the brush. And I did it heavy over there, and now in this spot here, I'm just using up what's left on the brush just to see again how it melds with that green. And already I'm in my zone. This is still therapeutic, just like my soul journal book. I just really enjoy doing these. So another trick that artists use for watercolor is sprinkling salt while it's still wet. I know it works wonderfully with watercolor and with inks. It works okay with this high flow acrylic as well, but I think I put too much salt on the green area there. And later on, when I've dried it and try and remove it, it removes some of the effect, but that's okay. Another effect I'm showing you here, and I've done it in my other lessons, is to take a long bristled brush and dip it in a lot of paint and then splash it like that. So now that it's dry, by the way, I didn't bore you with the drying. See, up close you can see where the salt is, but all that green area there was way too thick right there. So that wasn't as effective. But what you want to do once it's bone dry, don't do this while it's wet or you'll smear, but once it's very dry, you have to rub and sometimes scrape to get the salt because it does cling to the page. But look at the texture that it gives. This is a very useful trick that you can use. And it's fun and it's cheap. So I'm going to use a white Posca pen. I'm just testing it out. Sometimes you have to activate it by pressing it. So I'm trying that out on a paper first. And I'm just doing a little bit of detail because showing you that in this book, it's all about just making marks, having fun, exploring, learning. Again, I don't know where this is taking me. I'm just doing it. Gave that a good blow dry because those Posca pens are full of acrylic ink and they are wet, so they do take a while to dry, not like other felt pens. I've got a stash, as you know. I like my stash of printed tissues that I've made before, and I've picked some that I thought I would try. This black looks so wonderful with that blue, green, and white. That's the color story on this page, is blue, green, white, and then the black. So I spared you the unnecessary boredom of waiting for me to rip them up. I've played around. I've got some other ones too that are dots. Again, I'm sticking to my color story here. So there is a little bit of planning, but again, it's still intuitive. Right now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to decide where I want that white. And I've got that nice squiggly swirly. It's very strong. I'm just playing, because it's not glued down yet, I can play around with whatever orientation I want. I use matte medium to spread over the page so that I can glue down these tissue papers. So that just puts, and again, if you've watched my other videos, you know once we do this, that matte medium makes the tissue gooey and it dissolves it slightly, and so it becomes very transparent. So all you're seeing now are the black marks that I made on the tissue paper. Sometimes you can see, there it's pretty good, but sometimes you can see an outline of the tissue paper, but that's okay. In this book, this is just experimenting. I'm not trying to make everything perfect. And as you notice, I tore them in different shapes. The other one was long and narrow. This one's a square shape of tissue. And then we've got the swirly pattern. So it's broken, and then we've got the white dots. So now we've been applying tissue papers to our journal pages in the other lessons with matte medium, and that's fine, it works. But in the mixed media book that I did this in, it was a single page. Today I'm doing it the same technique in a small book, two-sided pages, so they face each other. So I'll show you later that there are lessons to learn from this this technique. Anyway, it's still a fun way to put it down, but we will go on doing it in a different way later on. So I decided to bring out some more white over top that swirly there, and I brought the Posca pen out again and put some dots. So they kind of match the dots from the tissue paper I already glued down. But remember, they're dry. So the problem now I had already dried it before I did this, but there's tacky, as you can see when I'm touching it. The matte medium that we put down is tacky. So to make that not so tacky, you can put simple cornstarch or baby powder and dust that all over the sheet. Again, do this when it's really dry. And why I'm doing that, especially in the crease, is because even if you think your book is dry, it's still fresh because this is all in the same day. Once you close that book, because the two pages are done and face each other, they could stick and cling to each other and get ruined. So that's just a trick that you can do. Later on, I'll show you others. I brought out some other colored tissue papers that I had previously printed on tissue. And now we're going to do a new page because that was just a quickie for the one spread. I'm calling it a spread because it's two pages facing each other. This is the second one, and I decided to let's play with some color now. So again, I'm using that matte medium, and I put it all over both pages, and now I'm gluing it down. Now, be careful when you place it down that you want to get in that crease really well, because if you don't, and if you just press down over top, really, really press it in there, because otherwise it could bubble over that folded area. It's really, really good to do that. Get it nice and tight inside the crease. And I'm using a paint spreader because it's tissue over the full page. It's easier to use something like an old business card or something like that, or a paint spreader or a spatula, so that you could spread it over evenly without the tissue paper bubbling. Once it was bone dry, I cut away that excess tissue. You can see it's showing through from the other side. And now I've got some extra baking sheet underneath both pages, so that if I put water and paint down, hopefully it won't get absorbed through to the back. But as you'll see when we're working on this book, there are all sorts of issues that happen. It's not an expensive little book, so spillage happens through that crease in the center of the page into other pages, and that's okay. This is just a little fun book. I don't have to worry, and when that happens on some of the pages, I work with it, I deal with it, and I say, okay, there's a color already on my page. So what I'm doing now is I'm spreading some blue. Again, you could do this with watercolor. As you know, I like to use transparent paints because when I'm using tissue paper, I want it to be transparent, so some of that tissue print is revealed through it. These colors are very complementary together, this blue and this. This is the Nicolazzo Gold, and it's one of my favorite colors, and this is transparent blue. The details will be below in the description. I'm trying not to touch much of the white. I'm just doing little dabs because I've got heavy blue on the left. I thought I'd put a little bit of blue on the right, but in different areas. And again, I sped it up, but I dried that before I went further. I've got some shapes, so shapes that I thought were interesting, and again, because they're not glued down, you can rotate them and decide how you like them, where they look good. But let's get them glued down now. I've kind of got them lined up and torn into the shapes I want, and we're ready to go. But because there's already a lot of texture from that first big sheet I put down, this is getting very busy and interesting now. I picked a pattern from my stash that was very subtle there. I wanted to keep it light and airy instead of those ones on the right there that are very dark. They'll be good in another use at another time, but I like how light and airy this is, and then it really makes this dark spot that I'm putting down pop. And I don't know yet, this is an experimental little book and it's just so cute, but who knows? I might end up with having so much success in it that I will like to go back later and add quotes or things. So I've got some blank areas there that are not too busy in the middle of the left and right there, that if I want, I could take a Posca pen and go over top of the detail and write a quote or a simple word, an inspirational word. This could end up being my book of quotes. I don't know yet. Here's another piece, just playing around and rotating. Again, this is not going in a gallery. Probably nobody will ever see this book but me. Someday down the road, I might refer back to this and say, oh, I really like what's happening there. I'm going to do a big version of that on canvas. Again, it's exploratory. And it's meditative. I'm so in my zone right now that nothing's on my mind. I'm just playing. So I found another little piece with some dots that I thought, let's soften that even more. I just love it. I just love what these printed tissues do. It's just magic. And if you don't like part of it while it's still wet and gooey from the matte medium, you just pull it away. Of course, at this point, I've got very sticky fingertips on my left hand. I had the page protector underneath there. Now I'm ready to do a new page. You can see very, very slightly that the blue bled through where the string is in the middle of the book, but that's okay. So I like how that looks. It's free to put quotes or stencils or anything at some further date. You can see I'm pressing there and it's still tacky. That's because I did a lot of these in one day. Even when you think they're dry, they can be tacky when you close that book. And even though I put baking powder on there, it can still be tacky. So I'm making sure that I don't press this book closed tight. Here's another thing you can use instead, but it's expensive. This cold wax, it goes on like butter. And it's just fine, fine beeswax. And if you rub that all over the pages, it will make them less clingy when you've got the book closed. It also softens the page. It gives actually quite a nice soft texture, almost as if the page is out of cloth. It's really wonderful. So I'm giving it a really good rub. But even when you do this, you should let the book stand free and open before you close it tight and put it away on a shelf. See how they're sticking? I got at it in time. I was lucky. Sometimes when that happens, it could pull pieces from one side onto the other. And even though that's happened to me in other journal books, big deal. It's just a journal book. If that happens, you could touch it up with some paint. But this beeswax works wonderfully. It also brightens up the colors. It's almost like putting a varnish over it. And it protects the page. So now you can actually see the texture of it almost when I'm holding it. It comes quite cloth-like. It's quite yummy. Put a lot of it in the seam there because that's vulnerable. It really sticks tight there between pages. So I decided, since I've shown you this lesson through my error, I mean, I used matte medium, but I was forgetting that I'm doing a two-sided spread. So learn from my mistake, and from here on in, we'll be using a glue stick to put our tissues down. Look how fun. So I'm just really, really, really going over it and giving it a good rub. So when you're in between sessions of painting, just leave it like that. Sometimes, you know, after a few days of drying, perhaps that problem will disappear. So I'm on to the third spread. I've got my box of tissues, and all of these I've made myself. There's 2 video links that I have in the description below that show you how to make these. They're so much fun. Once you learn how to do them, the sky's the limit. You're just like a rocket. You could just take off and learn and explore and do so many fun things. So I'm just trying to decide on this new spread what colors I want. So I've torn a few sections, and right now, before I do any of that, again, I'm playing with water, so I'm being very generous with the water on the brush. And now I'm going to put some paint down. Again, to save time, I just used what was in front of me, but I do have bottles of ink. I do have watercolors. I even gave it some more, another splash of water, just so you can see how the paint plays with the water, and wherever the water goes, the paint goes with it. But because I've decided I want to put some of that green tissue, printed tissue down on the bottom third, I'm dabbing with the tissue some of that, because if I put that green tissue over top this blue, it will turn into a dark green, which I don't want. So I dabbed even a little bit more. Now, you might say, well, this isn't being very intuitive. I am contriving it a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going with the flow, and I like actually what the pattern of the ink, the paint has done with where the tissue dabbed. It's quite interesting. It gives a texture. I pulled out a couple of Posca pens that are similar colors. And I thought, let's make some other marks. Again, I'm just showing you how you can do anything in this book. You don't have to just paint. And if we don't like these later, we can cover them up. So I have no idea if I even like that. It's not as if I really love it, but I'm just, again, when you know my work, you know I do layers and layers and layers, and quite possibly some will be revealed and it will look really interesting, and some of it will get covered. So I gave it a really good dry. Sometimes when it's still wet and you use the blow dryer, it blows the paint or ink or whatever you have into little rivers, little streams of paint, and that's fun. It's intuitive. You have no idea where it's going to go, and you just live with it. I wouldn't have thought to paint that, but there it is. It's quite fun. So now I'm ready to put on my bright green printed tissue. And I'm trying to decide, I've got these are all scraps from other projects, and I've always said, don't throw any of them out. You sometimes just want the tiniest little bit. So I'm just trying to decide how much of it I want and where I'm going to put it. I prefer tearing the edges of the tissue versus cutting it because it seems to dissolve better. But I had such sticky fingers, I had to use scissors and cut it. But again, if you tear the tissue, and this is something you'll learn when you experiment, if you tear the tissue, Once you add the matte medium, it dissolves better. But today, from here on in, I'm going to try to use the glue stick, so it's not really going to dissolve. So big deal. So you see the edge of the tissue. Again, this is an experimental book. I might use it as reference. There's nobody going to judge me and say, oh, wow, I can see the line of your tissue paper. I'm not sure if I'll use that. I'm just trying things out, giving it a look. I've used in my lessons, if you've seen them, I've used that pattern from a stencil many times. It is so fun when you place that over a bright color of ink or paint. And because I know I'm going to put that down, I want more color behind it. If I don't add more paint, then when I put that printed tissue pattern over top of this area, it won't bounce to the front and show the pattern of the print. Because it'll be white on white. So when I'm using tissue prints like that, I like to put a lot of strong color in the background. And then it makes the print on the tissue really, really pop. If you've seen my very first journal entry for Paint for Your Soul, you'll see the magic in it. And I do believe I used the very same stencil print on that. But it just shows you the magic of what it does to a page. I even like this, how it looks as it is without putting that over, but again, I'm experimenting, I'm showing you different things you can do. And you can take it from there. Really, I could have taken that orange color on my brush and painted in those circles, and that would have looked really cool too. But instead, while there was still paint on the brush, I added more water and I just spread that. So it's the same Nicolazo gold, but with more water on it, it looks quite yellow. That's what I love about that one color. So I stole some ink from the other area to add to this area. See how I'm stealing it? This is really fun just as it is. This would make a really neat page. So I'm using a glue stick. I've got a fairly large one there because it covers things. The issue that you have when you use a glue stick on a big piece of tissue paper is it softens the tissue paper and makes it very sticky and vulnerable. So you've got to do one pass over it like I'm doing and keep moving and watch the direction you go so that you don't tear that tissue. It is a little bit tough. You see how it sticks? So it's not that easy to do. But you'll get the hang of it. Practice on other pieces if you need to. And then it's hard, of course, to pull it off the page. So it's just a skill that you'll get better at as you do it. And it's a long piece of tissue, so you got to be careful when you place it down. I'm starting on the bottom right, where I line up the bottom of the page and hopefully the top right of the page. And then when you get to the middle seam there, make sure that that's embedded right within the seam really well before you go further. Now, you couldn't do this rubbing if I used the matte medium to put it down, but you can rub a little bit more like that when it's put down with a glue stick because you haven't wet the tissue paper as much. This is really graphic and abstract. This is really fun. But as you know, I'm an abstract artist for the most part. I can do realistic. Believe me, I can do a dog portrait that looks like a real photograph, but I really take a lot of pleasure for my soul out of doing abstracts. That's just what I've discovered in myself. So look already placing that down before we even glue it, how beneficial it was to add that extra color below there. So here we go again. Always one direction and never overlap. And that's why I use a big glue stick so that I don't have to do as many passes with it. Sticky, sticky, sticky. Oh, look how fun that is. I just love it. Love, love, love. And I'm trying to fan it out so that it doesn't fold. And again, really good inside that crease. Now again, I could leave this page, this spread exactly how it looks now, and I'd be happy with it. But this is all about me teaching you how far you can take things. Look at how the pattern of that tissue print just sort of picks up and joins with the green lines from the tissue I glued down. This is quite a strong color compared to the orange that got buried below the tissue, but we'll see where it goes. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe, because that tells YouTube that you like what I'm doing and it encourages me to do more. I'm just starting being a YouTube channeler, and I need that support to keep me encouraged to keep going. I'm going to do this anyway because it's for my soul, and it's like breathing. I have to do things like this every day or I'm not happy. So I'm going to do it anyway, but I sure do like your support. And comments. If you've got comments and suggestions or questions, please ask, and I'm happy to answer. So I found another print. It's very, very subtle with that blue. And let's see what happens there. It's making the page busier, but look what happens. It's actually picking up the pattern and joining with the blue pattern that's there from the other tissue. So it's very complementary. They work. Now, I know other YouTubers show you applying collage with glue stick just like this, and I like it. I don't mind doing it in a little book like this that isn't going to be seen by many people and isn't going to be on a painting for a gallery. But the problem I find, unless you tell me there's a glue stick that's very, very good, even if it seems like it's going down really well, I find that sometimes when I do this, later on, weeks later, I'll notice, or even a year later if I pick up that book and look, I'll see that the glue has separated a bit and the tissue wants to bubble and separate. So again, that doesn't matter because it's just a journal. But if I was going to do this technique on a piece of paper that I'm going to mat and frame, I would prefer to use the matte medium to glue it down. But the glue stick is a magic solution when you want to have the pages not stick together. So it's your call. Experiment, see what works for you. I just figured, maybe I'll do another layer, so I'll make a more strong statement of blue squiggles over in that green area. But part of me thinks I should have, when I look at this now, I think I could have left it just as it was. But that's okay. It's just paper in an inexpensive little book. The glue stick itself is a great tool for picking up the piece of tissue and lifting it. So unlike the other pages that the other two spreads, this is very, very busy. It almost looks like an Asian script. It looks very Japanese to me. And it's very busy, so what you're going to see, and if you like it like that, that's how you leave it. But I'm going to enhance things a little bit, and I'm going to cover up some of that as well. Again, just so I can show you the directions you can go. I've got some more patterns from those other tissue pages, so I'm just trying to decide what to do with them. There's an awful lot of busy patterns here. You've got scroll, looks like script, you've got squares, you've got scribbles, and now I've got some stripes. But again, as a learning tool, if you want to use this book later on, you could look back and say, I overdid it on that page. I wouldn't do that again. So lesson learned, and that's what this is for. It goes quite dark when you put it over the blue, doesn't it? It almost goes brown. There's a little bit of color theory. When you mix blue with orange, and they're complementary colors. When you mix complementary colors, they become a neutral. So those two together became brown. I didn't necessarily want brown on this page, but that's okay. And even that one, when I held it over there, I could see how brown it became as soon as it hits the area where it's blue. But it depends on your interest. And I decided, since it is so strong, that color, I'm going to just cut away a narrow panel of it, because I didn't want it to be too strong on the whole page, on the spread. Where do I want it? Where do I want it? I don't want that big a piece. I'm going to tear it in half. I don't want to use it. So there you go. Lesson learned. I just didn't bother. I'm doing the same thought process here. And again, no damage done, because it's not permanent till I glue it down. Whenever I think I'm going to put a piece of tissue at the bottom of the edge of a page, I do prefer to use scissors to cut a straight line, because then I don't have to worry about cutting that excess later on. I can just butt the straight line of the tissue to the straight edge of the paper, and I don't have to cut later. You just place it gently down right at the edge. So what I'm doing there is balancing the look of the left with all the heavy stripes, and making the eye look in the bottom. And again, this is very, very busy. I don't usually do my abstracts this busy when it's for canvas on the wall. But again, I'll say it again, this is a book to experiment and play. I've got a container of previously mixed yellow-green, which is high flow acrylic transparent, mixed with my my fluid white, which is opaque. So when you add the two together, it becomes a fairly opaque color of green, but it matches the rest of the green, and I'm using it. And I'm using my favorite paintbrush, my finger. So what I'm doing there is adding a little weight of color in the bottom. And I dabbed the back there, because I didn't want it to go onto the back of that. That's the problem as well when you do a little book like this with double page spreads, one against the other. Sometimes it can bleed to the back. All that hard work you did on one spread could be altered with color, and you'll see later on that happened to me here. And I don't mind. It's like I say, this is just play. I'm going to let you learn from my mistakes. I'm trying to decide, do I want to keep it busy? What do I want to do? Do I like those 4 squares on the top being so strong? I don't really love them. But I'm going to give it a good blow dry, which I sped up for you. While I blow dry, I think a little more about where I could go. So I didn't like that orange, so I took a very fat Posca pen, which is really fun to use because it covers a bigger area quicker. And I'm painting over it. So this is acrylic paint, and it is opaque, but sometimes you have to do a couple layers. So I'm trying to decide, do I want it to look like little windows? But I don't like how the eye goes up there and all you see is those big squares. It takes away from the rest of the page. What do you think? I gave it a good dry. Again, that acrylic ink is wet. And if you were to do anything further, it would, from the Posca pens, they spread, they smudge if you do it too quick. So I'm still thinking about those squares, but in the meantime, lucky me, I've got a Posca pen that's the very same blue as my transparent blue. So I'm bringing forward, and if you watch my other art journal entries, I do this often at this stage, is I enhance certain things that I want to bring forward because I like creating layers on the page. So by adding that blue over top, the blue that got covered by tissue paper, now it makes it pop forward. So when sometimes a background is too busy and you highlight a certain area and bring it forward, that detracts from the busy background. And this is where I call these my little Zen moments, because when I'm doing these, I'm just lost in the moment of what I'm doing, and I just get lost. I'm not thinking. My soul is very happy because it's just at rest. And in doing these highlights with the blue, I'm forcing the eye to travel across the page from left to right. And it strengthens the strength of color at that middle part of the page to balance the dark patches of orange that are there. I decided I didn't want to do an awful lot over in the right area. I wanted to leave that subtle and sort of disappearing into the background. I love doing that, adding extra white tissue over top of a pattern so that it gets fog-like and smoggy looking and disappears. It's kind of an illusion thing. And all I'm doing up there is adding another layer because, like I say, the Posca pens are opaque, but sometimes you have to do an extra layer. They're not shiny at all. They're very flat, very dull. Like, even though they're bright colors, they're a very flat finish. So that's why I always add a little extra layer to make the color pop. I'm still not liking those orange squares. But in the meantime, I'm putting a little more green. I decided to make the green. I didn't want that little white bit happening there. It didn't make sense. I wanted the green to touch that orange tissue. So it's actually brightening up and adding more weight to the look of the bottom of this spread. Also, in that spot right there, in adding more paint, I was able to cover. What I'm actually doing is, you can't tell unless you look really closely, that there was an edge of tissue paper there, so I didn't want that to be shown. So sometimes one of the tricks is, if you've got an opaque paint, you can paint over that edge and hide it. I think it was the same thing there. There was tissue paper edge and I was just masking it. Yeah, I'm not liking those squares. But I've got to give all of this a really good dry. Again, the Posca pen's very, very wet. So I've got the fat Posca out again, and I've decided I'm going to mask over those squares. And I know that they're still going to appear, but they're going to be much different. So you've got the look of squares up there, but you've got a different color, and already that's helped. And since I brought more white up there over the squares, I thought, let's dull some of that left busy area. I'm going to soften the look, not dull, but soften the look by adding. And some of the tissue there has still a few flecks of white on it. You can maybe tell by looking, and that helps to mask some of that background. And you might say, well, why did I put the other stuff there to begin with if I'm covering it up? But I'm not. I'm revealing it in layers. You can see the dots now in the pattern on that piece that I'm putting down as it hits the stripes on the left. It almost becomes like a basket weave now. I really like playing with textures. Trying not to touch the right squares because that's still very wet. I like what that did. But But because I put that layer of tissue, now I have to strengthen that blue again. So that's the third layer of blue Posca pen over that blue detail, because I really wanted that to jump forward. Can you see the difference now with what we've done here? I'm just exploring. Those white squares are dry now. Yeah, you can see I'm not happy with those squares, so it's like I'm thinking about covering them right up. But I don't like how when I tore that, I had it on the reverse side of the tissue, so I tore it the wrong direction. So I'm not happy with the shape. So that piece got smaller and smaller, but where I'm covering that middle section there at the top there, I needed just that little area to cover, so I didn't need a bigger piece. Now you can still see those circles I drew earlier, but they're very subtle. So I decided I'll put a little bit more in the top there. And it actually wraps over the stripe in a sort of a crisscross, like left to right and then right to left. It's kind of like curtains right there. So let's do a new spread. Again, if this is you, you could be doing one of these each day or each time you go to your table. Like you don't have to do them all in one day. I'm just putting them all in one, and I did do some of these over several days, just so you know, but I'm putting it in one video so that you can see 1 week of these instead of little 8-9 minutes videos. And if it's too long for you, you can speed it up, or if you subscribe and save, you can watch these one at a time as you like. I do that all the time with videos I like. I save them in a folder, and they're there when I want to look at them again. I love, okay, so in this case, I'm using the Nicolazzo Gold as well, but it's not the high flow acrylic, it's just fluid acrylic, so it's a lot thicker. It went on thicker. You can see where it's stuck in the middle of the right side there. But I really like how some of it gets more transparent and some of it stays really thick and opaque. I just love, again, here's where we can experiment, and here as well. And I did this when the other color was dry. Add more water, and with my finger I dabbed the red, which turns quite pink if you do it lightly. And in this case, I didn't want any patterns or tissue papers on the page. I wanted to just experiment with really, really bold colors. The tissue I'm putting down is not tissue, it's baking. So what happened when I added that pink, I stopped it and edited the page, but it put a little bleeding of, it bled over the edge of the page and put pink on the back of this other spread that we did. And it was an accident, but look what happened there. I just decided, well, if there's going to be pink there, I may as well make pink part of the story. I don't love so much what it's doing on the left page, but I'm crazy in love with what it happened to do around the squares. Again, here's one of those happy accidents where I couldn't have planned that. Look how it goes from pink and fades to white over the squares. And I worried that there might have been a little pink over there as well. You can't really see it. So I thought, well, let's try the same thing there. But because I had put matte medium down on that page instead of glue stick, the water was sitting on the surface and it wasn't getting absorbed. So this was a waste of time. But again, this is a lesson to show you. It would have been neat if that would have stayed like that, but it didn't. So I dabbed away, and hopefully a little bit of the pink, very subtly, will remain. But I love what happened on there with the squares. Just love it. And this page was dynamic. Okay, so here we have another day, another spread. Let's play. Time for some yellow. This is Indian yellow. Goes on really, really bright. But I had watered, it was running low on that container, so I added water and it was really, really runny. So it goes on very, very bright like lemon. Originally it was a little deeper than that. And it mixes really well with the Nicolazo Gold. Again, not sure what I'm doing at this point, but I wanted to show you this was just playing with color. I'm dabbing really well where the center of the page is because that's where it bleeds into the pages behind. I've got some tissue papers trying to decide what to do. This time I wanted very bold graphic black, and I wanted to keep this spread really simple, just have the strong color in the background and then a simple spread. Look how fun that is. And I even like how the black, I don't want to tear away the tissue so it's only that pattern. I love how the black disappears over the edge of the page. This is a really quick spread. It didn't take long at all, but it just shows you sometimes your favorite thing could be the easiest and the quickest. I didn't love the pattern on the bottom right there, but at this point it was so sticky and tacky from the glue stick that I wasn't able to tear it away. Again, first thing you do, get that crease really good and pressed. And it was really sticking to my fingers, so I wasn't able to get rid of that black pattern on the bottom there, right there. Oh, that's okay, I'm going to live with it. When it was good and dry, which I sped up, I cut away the excess tissue. So look how fun those two pages were. They were done in minutes. And some of that bled through the ribbon in the middle, or the binding in the middle of the book. So I added a little more of that yellow and went with the flow. Excuse the pun. And I thought, let's do something different on this page. So I found a pattern of X's, and I thought, it might be helpful to put it over the seam of the book so that if I put more color on here, it won't go through as much. But again, it's an inexpensive little book, so accidents are going to happen. If you use a lot of water and paint, it's going to go through the seam of the binding. I didn't dip my pen too strongly into there. I had a lot of water on the brush first, so that therefore I end up with pink and not red. And pink and yellow to me look beautiful together. And I know that at some future date, I'm going to put some stencil on that page. So this is a good way to let the book, even though those other pages in my mind were dry, that's a good way to store them in between days so that they don't stick together. See how that happened? Even though I was careful, some gold went through the center of the book onto the next page. That's okay. I decided since that's there, you might think this one's quite excessive, but this is a total collage page. This is like overkill collage, but we haven't done collage yet in this little book. And collage is just layer after layer after layer of different patterns and colors and textures. So let's go with it, people. Let's have some fun. The only problem with that glue stick is it gets on your fingers. So again, wherever I can, I use the straight edge of the tissue to the straight edge of the page so that I don't have to cut as much later. And I've got a friend stuck to my fingers. So you might think, wow, this is getting really busy. I sped it up. And even though that's layer after layer after layer, they're very thin. It's just tissue paper. All of those things I applied. I lost the video that showed me stenciling. But you know how to stencil. You get an ink pad, you get your stencils, and you press down and you stencil pages. So unfortunately, I did a stencil on most of my pages, but that video is lost. I really apologize for that. I had fun. So the stencil disappears a little bit. Oh, and also I made a tab on the top right there, and I lost that video as well. But it's fun to take an old scrap of paper that's got paint on it, make a square out of it, fold it, glue it down, and I've got a tab in my book. So what my plan is for every 7-page spread, every 7 pages, which is 1 week, I'm going to have a tab. So that every time you see a new tab, that's a new week. I wanted to bring out some more color and hide that tissue paper edge. And I did do those squiggles in white, but now that they're down, instead of leaving it white all across left to right on the bottom of the page, you'll see what I do. Again, I'm just adding a little more transparent paint over top the tissue so that you just see the pattern, and it kind of makes it less, I hope you agree, it makes it less busy as a background. So this here, I want to add some more pink and do the same thing there. But in this case, rather than having that graph line, I don't know what else to call it, graph line there, I didn't want it white all the way across. If you add some color over top of that, it absorbs some of it. It doesn't take all of it, but it alters the look of that. Anyway, I really like how I've highlighted the colors of the leaves with different color Posca pens. It brings that detail forward and it makes the background less busy. So I thought, well, I'll add some pink in there. Instead of working in and around the white squiggle lines, I went right over it because it is a transparent paint. When you paint on thick like that and then wipe it back, which I will do, some of it sticks to the white detail, but in a more transparent way. And then I did the same thing with the Nicolazzo Gold, so that I'm making that graph line that's white shift from pink to gold to white. And I like how it plays and it moves the eye from left to right. And it's complementary to the leaves that I colored. So here's the book. Here's the first week. I'll show you each page. And I'm sorry again, the pages that I've stenciled, I lost that video, but you get the idea. I just thought I'll add a few stencils. This is just so much fun. I've had a lot of fun doing this for you. I hope you experiment and have fun. I think that you should display this on a bookshelf just like this because it's so much fun and people will love it.